The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Teflon Pan Man. I'm the Teflon Pan Man. Ain't nothing gonna stick on me.
Well, hello everyone and good evening. Welcome to the podcast All You Can Eat. I am your host, Rob Rosenthal, coming to you live. I love coming live from New York City, New York, where it is a toasty 80 plus degrees, the dog days of summer here. And this is episode number 22 of All You Can Eat, a podcast essentially about deliciousness. And tonight's deliciousness has a focus on restaurants and the restaurant business. And I'm very excited to tell you that in a few minutes I will introduce you to tonight's guest, Jason Clampet, who happens to know more about restaurants than most people because, and I'll introduce him in a little while, but he's not only the founder of Skift, but also the general manager behind Skift Table, and they focus on the on the business of restaurants in this country. So a lot of ground to cover tonight. Happy to be here. I will tell you now that if you have any interest in calling in at some point, you're invited to do that, assuming all the technical things work properly, which is kind of a major assumption. The number to get us is 800-508 5431. That's 800-508-5431. I start this evening with the passing of another kind of giant of the food world. In fact, the third one in a relatively short period of time. Anthony Bourdain, who's passing still. I think haunt is perhaps too strong of a word, but I still feel upset when I think about the loss of Bourdain. And then following that, you had the passing of Jonathan Gold, who, I've spoken about in, I think, the past week or two. He was certainly the critic's critic when it came to restaurant criticism. The first restaurant critic, in fact, to win a Pulitzer Prize for food criticism. I'm a guy that had a documentary produced and about him, City of Gold. And again, he was an LA restaurant guy, but as someone who has eaten at 3,000 restaurants on 6 continents, I have to say that I've been reading restaurant reviews since the time that I was a kid. So Gold's passing certainly was premature and significant. And then this week, we had the passing of Joel Robuchon. And for those who don't know, Robuchon was a French chef and restaurateur, actually named by the Gomio Guide as Chef of the Century. Operated about a dozen restaurants all over the world, and ended up with more Michelin stars, 32 Michelin stars, than any other chef in the world. That's, again, a Michelin star, most chefs are ecstatic about one, just beyond themselves two, and then there's the occasional 3 Michelin star restaurants, which are super rare and highly, esteemed. And anyway, Robuchon ended up with 32 of those over his dozen or so restaurants. 3 giants of the food industry, all by the way related to tonight's subject, which is restaurants. And I will just say that I know that people have this idea that the death rule of 3s, that somehow people celebrities die in 3s. This is not really true. Kind of a confirmation bias. It's happened periodically, and so it's taken to be something that people, speculate about. But that's neither here nor there. It's the passing, and in fact, one of the things that came across my site yesterday was an article written by Jane Hansen, writing in Decanter, which is an online publication focused on wine. And she said in her article, which only showed up yesterday because it had not been published prior to this, she said, in honor of Robuchon, here are some highlights from my interview with him on choosing a good restaurant, on the perfect meal, and on gastronomy in general. She asked Robuchon, what are the details that you look for in a great restaurant? Robuchon said, the welcome is key. I am always looking at the small details, such as whether the table has been dressed carefully. If there are wrinkles in the tablecloth, you know that other things behind the scenes will have similar shortcuts. I like a restaurant to smell good, not just for the promise of great cooking, but rather to be assured that nothing is interfering with the scent of the food itself. And I can tell you something, by the way. I mean, that seems small, but nothing is more, well, I don't want to say nothing. One of the things that is incredibly annoying is the pollution that comes from other tables that interferes with my, with my food eating. I remember the days they used to allow cigarette smoking in restaurants, but then even when that was banned, you sometimes have people that come in with way too much, cheap perfume or cologne, and it literally ruins the meal for me because it interferes with your own taste buds. Robuchon said service has to be kind and effortless, not academic. I want it to feel spontaneous and from the heart. And above all, I want to feel that the chef loves what he does. Cooking is an act of love, and that love must be transferred to the guests. She asked, what's your favorite dish to order in a restaurant? Robuchon said, a good steak frite. That's one of the key dishes that you can order in a restaurant anywhere, and is often where a chef can show off his skills through the simplest of dishes by choosing the best cut, preparing it to perfection. This is interesting, too, because, by the way, in all of the conversations and all of the interviews that I've had with the greatest chefs, and I've interviewed a number of them, including, Pepin, you ask the greatest chefs what their kind of favorite or their go-to meal is, or their exemplary meal, and they all choose, like almost universally, the simplest things, like I asked Pepin, like if you're on a deserted island, what are the 3 or 4 or 5 ingredients you want to have? And I remember he wanted bread, wanted a good loaf of bread, he wanted a chicken and eggs. Like he was thrilled with that. So it's not unusual that these guys who are cooking some of the most intensely complex and rich and sophisticated dishes in the world, when it really comes down to it, are most appreciative of the simple. I remember them telling me also, like one of the ways that these guys would actually test to see if a chef was worthy of hiring for their restaurant was to see if he could roast a perfect chicken or make a perfect omelet. Because while it sounds easy, it turns out that it actually requires real skill to get it right. She asked Robuchon, how has your philosophy on food evolved? And he said, I still believe that the quality of the cooking is paramount, but when I was young, I wanted it to be sophisticated. I was always looking to be blown away. Today, it's the opposite. I know how difficult it is to be simple and still remain exceptional. It's the hardest combination to achieve, and today I regard it as the greatest success because it's all about the pleasure of the client. As I get older, I return to the truth of flavors. I hate not being able to identify what I eat. As a chef, I ask myself if we have the right to take the life of a fish or an animal if we're then going to transform it beyond all recognition. We must show respect for the food we eat and the clients we're preparing it for. I am also aware as I get older, he continued, of a desire to pass on what I have learned. I came up through the Compagnon de Tour de France system, where French craftsmen from stonemasons to carpenters learn their skills from the generation before them. It has given me the belief in transmission of skills from master to apprentice. And so in 2018, I will open the Institut International Georges Robuchon in an attempt to give back some of what I have been taught in my life. How did your childhood affect how you relate to food? I'm the youngest in a family of 4, said Robuchon, and after the Second World War, we had very little money. My mother would buy large loaves of bread that we would have to last for days at a time, and every time she broke off a piece of bread for us, she would make the sign, the cross over it. That gesture marked me deeply, and I've always carried it with me, especially as I began cooking in a seminary, working with nuns to prepare food. And then finally, what is your favorite aperitif? Robuchon said that London hotels made the best cocktails in the world. Their barmen really know how to make a great cocktail and make it convivial. When staying in London, I love the style and warmth of the Covent Garden Hotel and the Soho Hotel, both part of the same small group. And for my aperitif of choice, I love a well-chilled glass of Taylor's Port. And he continues with, the best gin and tonics right now are in Spain. They serve them in a huge glass with a long spoon. The waiter will rub the rim of the glass with a lemon, then pour the gin over the ice, and follow that by pouring the tonic from a great height, emphasizing the bubbles. It's a wonderful spectacle. And because I, too, want to pay respect to Robuchon, my friends, I sit here with a glass filled with gin and tonic. In my case, a London gin, dry. Beautiful product, by the way. Really good tonic. That matters. Good, fresh tonic. And a nice chunk of lime, and I've said it before, gin, for me, has the capability of being hallucinogenic. I feel like it's the one thing that you have to be so careful how much you drink. One good martini, lovely. In fact, it was the raconteur, which I've mentioned before, Dorothy Parker, who in the 30s at the Round Table here at the Algonquin in New York, wrote the little ditty, which I love to repeat. She said, I like a good martini, 2 at the very most. After 3, I'm under the table. After 4, I'm under the host. And so with that, I will sip over the course of this podcast today. I will sip on this gin and tonic so that I limit myself only to this one and remain totally vivid and clear in my mental capacity so that I can have a conversation with the talented Jason Clampet, who I would like to introduce to you now. Mr. Jason. Jason, are you there, my friend?
I think I am.
Beautiful, yes. Can hear you loud and clear. Let me tell everybody a little bit about you before we converse. Jason Clampet is the co-founder of the travel intelligence brand Skift, and also the general manager of Skift Table. Since launching in, I'm very excited about this, Jason, because it turns out that you launched Skift in August of 2012. So literally, we're at the kind of 6-year anniversary. Do you happen to know what day in August?
It was actually last Monday, so it was July. The last day of July, if my calendar's right.
Okay, well, look, all right, so I'm wrong already, but anyway, happy 6 years, because
Thank you.
Because in that time, Skift has become the most visited travel industry news website in the United States, among other things. Jason is a digital content strategist and a veteran of online travel websites. He has extensive editorial experience and has traveled and worked around the world. And I think also, Jason, let's first of all welcome. Thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
And I also, let's start with this. What about, tell people who don't know, basically, what is Skift?
Well, in the most boring sense, we're a B2B news website, and I say boring because business to business, where you basically communicate to people in your professional field, news and information has traditionally been a really kind of boring area. You reprint press releases, you do stuff for vendors, it's kind of blah. The nice thing, at least as I like to think about it, for us is that as there have been challenges across media and journalism over the past decade, some people have moved to the B2B model where you don't have to do link bait because everybody who reads your site actually needs your information. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's really up the game in the B2B field. There's a lot of really strong B2B sites across different industries. On fashion, you have Business of Fashion, and advertising, you have Digiday, and travel and restaurants, I like to say you have Skift. And so, we talk to people in the industry who value what we offer, who pay us for what we offer, and in return, we don't give them a 20-page slideshow of the craziest thing that flight attendants have ever worn, and that makes me feel good.
So now let's talk about what I guess you would call it the line extension. You guys brought Skiff Table into existence. What about Skiff Table?
So we had, Skiff to Travel. The idea was it was about the business of travel, and so with Skiff Table, it's restaurants are right next to travel, and in the case of hotels, they're inside of travel, and so we thought, why not look at the business of restaurants? And there's a lot of good resources out there, but there's nobody who speaks directly to people in the travel industry in the same way that we think we can. And we always like to look at consumer habits. So instead of looking at, who the new general manager is for a resort or a hotel group or a restaurant group, we like to look at how consumers are discovering new places to go, how they're paying for things once they get there, and then also how they're sharing their experiences with people once they leave. And so like with travel, we tend to look at restaurants through the eyes of consumers and the choices that they're making.
I mentioned Bourdain before, and I feel like, there's been a lot kind of written. I feel like I've read dozens of articles, but it was only today that I noticed your interview with Bourdain, which I thought was really terrific, and I thought there were some insights in there that I hadn't seen on other from some of the other articles. So two things about that. Number one, what was your sense of his passing? How did it affect you?
On basic level, non-professional level, I was sad. He's somebody who I've read for years. I've watched his shows over the years. I also, you see the ecosystem that's kind of grown up around him in the positive sense. On the video side, his work with the Roads and Kingdoms team, the people who read his books, and there's this giant community around him who has listened to how he approaches both travel and restaurants, and it's in a very genuine. It was in a very genuine way, and so somebody who is so front and center and in the public eye about these things, who had a very positive effect. It was sad to see them. It was sad to see them die.
Well, anyway, I did. I agree, and I suppose if anybody wants to take a look, I guess I probably found that interview on Skift. So I suppose people could go to skift.com and probably do a search for Bourdain and find that same piece that I read today.
Yeah, I think it was from 2016, if I remember right.
I also caught on a kind of related subject. When is this article? August 8th. Wow, that's today. So there's an article in Bloomberg Business Week today by Christopher Palmieri, headlined "The Twilight of the Celebrity Chef." Having a name like Gordon Ramsay or Emeril Lagasse on a restaurant once was a recipe for success, but rising rents and changing consumer tastes have taken a toll. So I want to talk to you in general about how kind of dining out has changed, but this, I think I was kind of, I don't know if I was surprised or not, but you go through the article and it's not only Gordon Ramsay and Emeril Lagasse, Jamie Oliver, and then you have Bobby Flay closing restaurants, and you have Guy Fieri closing restaurants. What do you make of that? It's like I see it somehow as a positive thing, because I was never a super believer in these guys putting their name on things that they couldn't, like, fundamentally, quality control. I mean, if you think of the opposite to me is like Eric Repair at Le Bernardin. The guy has one restaurant and one only, and it's always extraordinary and has been forever. Then you got these guys that slap their name on, burger places or whatever, and I guess I was never really a big believer. What do you think of this trend?
Well, I think this trend is reflective not so much of celebrity restaurateurs or celebrity chefs as a big challenge facing the industry, which is real estate. Because most of these people in the Bloomberg story were in major markets: LA, San Francisco, New York, Miami, where real estate has made doing business very, very difficult. So, Bobby Flay, shut his place north of Washington Square Park a couple years ago. He shut the one in Midtown recently.
Mm-hmm.
Guy Fieri's thing was in Times Square. I forget what the original story about Guy Fieri's place was, but what he was paying in rent was $1 million a month, something insane.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that these are actually challenges that non-celebrity chefs are facing these days. This and the challenge of some labor costs and how things are changing there, and they're really impacting all levels of operations. So while I am somewhat happy that I don't have to worry about slipping on donkey sauce while walking around Times Square.
Right.
I think it does speak to the real difficulties of doing business these days in major markets, where unless you have a ton of money coming in financing your operations, and being able to secure the right real estate, and then being able to churn people through at a fast enough rate that you can keep that real estate, you're not going to last. And the question at the end of the day is, what type of restaurant can you support then? I think because of that, you see people like Jose Andres, who he heads up a very large restaurant group, the Think Food Group.
Mm-hmm.
They have some fine dining restaurants. They have some upscale casual restaurants. They have fast food restaurants. They have fast casual restaurants, and those are spread out. Their hub is in D.C., but they're in university towns, because they realize the best place to do a fast casual joint with a vegetarian bent is around college campuses, for instance. And so it forces people to be a little more creative about how they do operations, and some people can do it well. I think Andres is a good example, and some people, it's all about flash. It's all about the PR stuff, and I think that's the Gordon Ramsays of the world and things like that.
Well, dining in general, dining out obviously, has changed a ton. One of the things that you've touched on is the difficulty based on the real estate costs, but in general also it's like the small kind of neighborhoody restaurants are at least where at least in New York, they're oftentimes disappearing, and it's the combination of the real estate costs together with the the expense of living, hiring help in a city where it's difficult to afford basically to live. The whole scene has changed, but a lot of that also is driven, and this is kind of your expertise. A lot of that is driven by, I guess, what I would call kind of like a sociocultural change on the one hand, which is that people essentially aren't cooking really anymore. That's part one, and then part two is technology is making a difference. I have been lamenting through all 22 episodes as a guy that wrote, that does the cooking and wrote a cookbook, that no one's cooking anymore. They call it the slow death of the home-cooked meal. And in fact, as of like a year ago, we do spend more money going out to eat and drink than on groceries in this country. So that you have that issue. And then you also have, technology, which has made it, I guess, super easy for people to either pick it up or have it sent in from restaurants. What's going on out there?
Well, I think there's I think you and me are similar. We both like to go out to restaurants, and we both cook a lot at home. And so I think we're the worst sample.
Right, probably, okay.
We're atypical. But I think that, I think that you are right in the people are, especially younger generations, going out much more to eat, and they're not choosing, of course, the 4-star, 5-star places. They're doing the Chipotles and above of the fast casuals of the world. Where our office is in Midtown Manhattan, where there's a lot of startups, where people are all around between 28 and 31 years old. The lines coming out of the Sweet Greens and the other fast casual joints where they sell $13 bowls of grains and greens, are just a pandemic practically. But I think that on one hand, technology really done right opens up revenue streams for restaurants, which they wouldn't otherwise have. And as long as they don't get into agreements with delivery companies where they're getting screwed and forced to do discounts, 10 years ago it was Groupon, which kind of preyed on restaurants that were desperate to get people in the door, so desperate that they, everything was a loss leader. I think some of these companies, the deals they do with delivery companies are the same thing, where they are getting squeezed, and so the $13 entree that they sell in the restaurant, they're also selling at $13 for delivery, but they've also got to cough up $4 to $5 in fees that they turn over to some Silicon Valley company. And so there are some real challenges there. I think that restaurants that are able to kind of take the time to look at what some of the technology companies offer can really do some smart things. I was reading about some that have decided to put different menus online than they do in the restaurants, and so they don't sell everything that they sell in restaurants because they can't. One, they don't taste as well when they're delivered, and
right.
Two, the price point doesn't match up, and so they think about delivery first items, which is a smart idea, and that way they serve the person who really wasn't likely going to come in the restaurant that night anyway, and so in that sense they're competing with a grocery as opposed to losing business to delivery, and so I think I think we're definitely in a big transition period. I think that we'll see some shakeout in the industry. One, as courts rule on what delivery people are in the labor ecosystem. Are they really employees, or are they that deserve more protections and benefits, or are they at will workers that don't need to be covered by protections? So I think that will cause some shakeout. I think we'll see consolidation there, and I think we'll see some VCs that get sick of funding some of these losing companies.
How do you see the trend kind of continuing? I mean, are we going to get to a point when basically, there'll be again further than where it is now, that more and more people will rely on someone else to do their cooking and have it delivered?
I don't know. I think how much time we spend and how much money we spend on cooking at home is also a reflection of our labor conditions, and are we working 10 hours a day or 12 hours a day at the office? Is it difficult to find a grocery that has healthy food? I think there's so many things that come into play there. I think we've seen, with the meal delivery kit companies, they're all struggling. Kroger did a big investment in one the other day to kind of save it. Blue Apron has struggled. The ones that we saw that were specific to the New York area have really suffered as well. And so, some of it's a fad, some of it is change consumer habits. But I think that, and also some is about what's available on the retail side. I went into a Whole Foods the other day, and I'm not somebody who's eager to jump on and criticize Amazon, but I have never seen such a poorly operated Whole Foods in my life. And the quality of the vegetables that were there, the quality of the service was awful. And so I think that will have an effect really on how we shop and cook at home for a while. So there's so many forces coming into play. People aren't going to stop cooking, but people will cook in different ways depending on their own work situation and also what's available on their way home in the markets.
Why are the meal kit delivery services failing? What's kind of the root cause of that? Is it an economic thing, or is it something else?
Well, I think one of the challenges for them has been maintaining users who are going to order a certain number of meals a day. They spend so much of their money on marketing. If you ride a subway in New York, somebody's going to try to sell you a mattress, and somebody's going to try to sell you a meal kit delivery service in the advertising.
Right.
You're going to see that constantly. It's like podcasts. That's all you hear. So much money is going towards marketing and trying to get customers new customers and then also get customers to stay, and that's the real challenge. Meal kits are kind of cool from time to time. Actually, Amazon Fresh had a really cool meal kit service for about 3 months, and it was one of my favorites. Like, the ingredients were high quality. It was bagged just right. It was the perfect mix of the prep that you do and the prep that they do. And then they just, for whatever reason, decided not to do it anymore. And so I think that meal kits are great if you remember to schedule everything on the Sunday so that you have the deliveries at the right time. There's a faddish element to them, and so they have to figure out how they can survive as a real business and not just something backed by VC money from San Francisco.
What I wanted to ask you was also this: is the trend that we're seeing in terms of people both going out more often and ordering from restaurants more often, is that kind of specific to big major metro areas, or are we seeing that also kind of throughout the country and in suburban areas as well?
Well, I think there is definitely a danger of looking at what's happening for you and I here in New York, and then saying this is what's happening everywhere else. Totally. If you look at like the delivery services, all of the Uber Eats and Grubhubs and DoorDashes are scrambling to make exclusive deals with fast food companies and other chains. And the reason they're doing that is because they want to have market penetration across the country. So when Uber Eats says, "Oh, we made a deal with McDonald's," okay, they're all of a sudden in every market in the United States.
Right.
So they don't have to go door to door signing people up anymore, because all of a sudden they've got 10 restaurants in Indianapolis that are going to do enough business. And so there are trends that are unique to
bigger major
New York.
metros.
I think delivery is much bigger in densely populated urban areas than it is in mid-sized cities and smaller, where distances are greater. But they have their own challenges. A friend of mine wrote a great story for, I'm trying to remember the website now, about food shortages in Kansas. And just the difficulty of finding a grocery in Kansas because towns have shrunk and people have moved to some urban centers, and everybody's so far stretched apart. So I think everybody's challenged a bit right now with where we get our food and how it gets to us.
Let's talk about another. I don't know if it's yet a trend, but you can certainly comment on it. What's going on with tipping and no tipping allowed? How do you see that playing out?
Our reporter at Skip Table, Erica Adams, has been on top of this the last few months, and that scene in Annie Hall where Woody Allen grabs Marshall McLuhan. I wish I could kind of grab Erica right now and put her in front of the microphone. And so, this is something that, the biggest battles are being waged in major markets now, where we're looking at, there's been a movement in the last few years to increase wages, increase the minimum wage. And we saw a vote in Washington, D.C. a few months ago regarding tip credit. Governor Cuomo in New York State is expected to make a ruling regarding the tip credit. The tip credit is where restaurants are allowed to pay somebody less money because tips will make up for the gap in wages, and therefore they can make $5 an hour or $7 an hour or whatever, as opposed to $12 to $14 an hour. And so there's a lot of battles going on there, and no tipping is one element of it as a way for restaurants to kind of get ahead of the problem. Danny Myers used the example of, they banned smoking long before any other restaurants did in New York City because he knew it was coming and he wanted to get ahead of it. And so they've introduced, gratuity included at a number of his restaurants in New York. There's been some challenges there. One of the interesting things is that the complaints you hear about it are largely from front of the house staff. You don't hear dishwashers complaining about it, because all of a sudden they make more money. And so it is a more equitable distribution of money. It's not the people who get the great shifts on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday night. Those are the people who are complaining, because they, used to get, do really, really well in tips in restaurants. And once those shift to a gratuity included, the dynamics change slightly. I think it's going to be an interesting few years as it shakes out. I think as we move towards having guaranteed higher wages in major cities, more restaurants will end up moving to the gratuity included. I think that there's going to be a challenge for consumers when they look at the menu and they see that a chicken dish is $32 when it used to be $23. Mm-hmm. Because one thing that is a challenge with the gratuity included is taxes and stuff are taken out of that. So it's not just a matter of raising everything by 20%, as you might because of typical tip of 20%. There's more money coming out of that than before. So security taxes, payroll tax, things like that. So the menu items really need to go up by about 33 to 35%.
Yeah, that's significant.
Which is a big sticker shock. And so restaurateurs are really reluctant to, raise the price of a burger from, $15 to $21 or $19. Math isn't that great.
Yeah, it's a lot of bread. Speaking about which, there are, I want to get into pizza for a second, because it occurred to me there's actually 3 stories that are current, and they're all pizza related. First of all, what's going on with Papa John's?
Well, that's interesting, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like, well, so tell people who aren't really familiar, just give a little backstory on the story, if you will.
So, Papa John's is a pizza chain that makes not very good tasting pizza. That has for a while.
Okay, I agree.
For many years, their primary pitchman, who appears in all their ads and on their pizza boxes and everywhere, is the company founder, John Schnatter.
Right.
And you see him palling around with Peyton Manning. You see him at NASCAR things. And he really likes being on the camera. I think that's the one thing that everybody can agree with. Whether or not we enjoy seeing him on the camera, I think is another matter.
Right.
I think that the declining sales over the last 3 years, there's an argument to be made that people don't want to see John anymore. And also in his defense, even though I don't like defending him, Domino's has been incredibly strong and innovative over the last 2 years. I think you probably remember their campaign that they started basically saying our pizza tastes bad and we want to fix it.
Right.
It was genius. And so they basically said, we're tearing down our company to the roots. We're going to make better stores, and we're going to make better pizza, and we're going to listen to you, and we're also going to invest in technology and make it easier to track your pizza and, to order it. And, I don't order from Domino's at all, but I have the app on my phone, and about once a month I'll get an alert on my Apple Watch suggesting to order a Domino's pizza, and I've come really close to ordering it from time to time because it's perfect and how they time the stuff. And so, Papa John's has faced competition from Domino's, which has been so much smarter these days. He left the company right at the beginning of the year. They announced the Friday before Christmas, at the end of the day, that he was leaving the company, which was very odd for the founder and CEO of a company to be kicked out the Friday before the holidays with no succession plan in place. Struck many as odd, and struck me as very odd. And then in the months since, other things have come out about his behavior, comments that he's made, things like that. Yesterday they had their earnings call, and he issued, even though he's been kicked out, he's lost his CEO title, he's lost his chairmanship title, he still owns 30% of the stock. He issued his own press release about their earnings as if he was still involved in the company. There's a really good argument made that he's an egomaniac who can't stand to be not on camera, and this is just killing him. And that argument would be easy to support with lots of evidence. And so, it's a case of, there's a ton of pizza brands out there. Why are you going to order from a subpar one? And especially when the competition is so strong these days, both from traditional big brand players like Domino's, and then, the push for smaller independent pizzerias that you can order from that are not Papa John's. So, they need to figure out how to cut this guy loose. They're offering discounts and money back to franchisees, which never happens. And it's just because he's just screwed the business so poorly with his antics.
Pizza story number 2, and I'm sure I got this from you as well from Skiff Table. So you have a company called Zume, Z-U-M-E, that's making, I guess they're making pizza from robots that gets completed on the trucks on the way to delivery, and you write in a story that they're getting nearly $750 million in investment from SoftBank. So tell me a little bit about Robot Pizza and Zume out there in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, so we license stories from both Associated Press and Bloomberg, and so Bloomberg's team did the work on this story, but we ran it, and $750 million, almost $1 billion going to a robot pizza delivery company. We do, one of the things that I've enjoyed that we've done at Skift, both at Travel and at Table, is we have this thing called the Skift Take, where we'll do, the story is just the news. It's typical, straight, unbiased, unopinionated, traditional news. And then we have this little thing called Skift Take, where we can kind of cut loose. I forget what the Skift Take was on Zoom, but mine, if I had to be asked for one right now, is like, isn't there a better way to piss away $750 million?
I think that was the Skift Take, if I recall.
Okay. But it's just, it was done by SoftBank, which is going to go down in history as giving out more, throwing more bad money after.
Good money after bad, right? Yeah.
Yeah, than any other company on the face of the earth. I just don't understand the thinking behind this. It's such a kind of Silicon Valley idea where they think that pizza delivery needs to be reinvented. It's a matter of getting something hot to somebody's door as fast as possible. As cheap as possible too. You want to, if you're paying for pizza to be delivered, you don't want to spend much more than $10, and if you get garlic knots, $12. And so the idea that you're going to do some, robot delivery, baking, whatnot, is just, I think it's just nonsense. So I look forward to writing the obituary.
I'm going with you on this one. $750 million. It seems to me that could be invested in some decent pizza ovens out there. You know what I mean? Like I think you ought to open. Like if they're so desperate for pizza that it has to be made by robots and finished on a truck, they may want to contemplate opening up a couple of decent pizzerias out there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you could go to the moon. You could finance, the birth of a new country.
But, I wonder, though, I have my own feeling about this, so this is just an aside, but, do you think that a robot is capable of making a pizza? Because one of the things I remember noticing from the article is that they even though it's done robotically, they tried to essentially kind of replicate the way a human would do it, so the sauce might have even gone on a little haphazardly. Like, it wasn't a perfect pie, it was made to be a replica pie. But, do we think that... And maybe it's possible. Do we think that robots can make a pizza as well as a what do they call the pizza maker? Anyway, a pizziolo like that. Is that possible?
Yeah. Well, in their defense, and as somebody who I never worked at a Domino's, but I worked at a TCBY.
Okay.
If me as a 16-year-old could make waffle cones and serve you frozen yogurt. I would imagine that the bar for quality among the teenagers making delivery pizzas is not incredibly high. And so the danger is, does the robot perform too well,
right?
In comparison. So, to me, it's just all like, is this where technology is best used?
Right.
And I think that's one thing we try to cover at Skiff Table is like, what's the best use of technology? Like, I think, Uber is a great example, and car services are great examples of, anybody who's been in an area where taxis don't drive by often, the idea of being able to broadcast where you are and have a car come get you, because the car is not that far away, but, they don't necessarily know somebody's standing on the corner. It's a great use of technology. It's really smart, and despite the drawbacks of the car services in different areas, it's a really smart use of technology. I don't think a robot pizza maker is the smartest use of technology.
Well, I'm going to tell you this. I'm fine with the Skiff take. I'm going to give you my take on this. If I have to pitch an idea, I'm taking it right to SoftBank. They seem to be pretty easy, is all I'm saying.
I think this radio show could do with $500 million.
I'm going right to SoftBank. All right, here's your third pizza story. Again, Dateline, August 7. I'm only a day off this thing. Esquire magazine, a U.S. pizza museum, is opening in Chicago and not New York. And what I love about the article so much, by the way, is that they knew in opening up a pizza museum in Chicago rather than New York, with the subhead, by the way, Deep Dish wins this round. What I love so much about the article is some of the comments that were picked up on Twitter. So there's a picture there of like a deep dish pie, and one of the comments on Twitter was, "Kids, this is a bowl of tomato bisque, not pizza. Don't do drugs." Here's another one. There's already a U.S. pizza museum. It's 71 square miles, and it's called Brooklyn. And then here's one. Oh, fantastic! In other news, the Seafood Museum will be opening in Fargo. The New York Deli Museum will be opening in Fairbanks, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is being moved to Key West. So, yeah, there you have it. Pizza showing up in the museum, showing up in Chicago.
Well, I don't know if it was the New York Post or the Daily News, but they had a headline that said "Deep Diss."
That's good too.
Actually, I think it was Metro, the free thing they hand out,
right.
Deep Dish. I'm somebody who appreciates Chicago's deep dish casserole.
Right.
I think it's delicious. I've actually had Lou Malnati's sent to me in New York. I think it is a great product. I think calling it pizza is probably a mistake. If they found a different name for it, something between pizza and casserole, it would be more appropriate. I think that Chicago also revels in how it really, really bothers people in New York when they claim to be the better pizza place. So I think that's funny, and so I'll give Chicago a little credit there. I also think that if New York can claim to be a great city for hot dogs, and Chicago doesn't riot based upon that, I think that they can go ahead and claim to have a museum. I think that they do the hot dog game better than anybody in New York ever has.
Right.
In New York now you have to get something boiled in lukewarm water for 3 days and handed to you on the street, as opposed to Chicago, where the hot dog is a glorious construction of something delicious. So if maybe New York could do a trade, we could get them to change the name of pizza if we change the name of what we call hot dogs.
Right. I'll give you that. I think that's that by the way speaks to your gift as a writer and an editor, because you're 100% right.
Oh, good.
Yeah, we'll give them the dogs, but let's face it, pizza. By the way, speaking of pizza, I feel like I owe it to the folks who are tuned in live and who will catch us in archives to thank one of the sponsors of today's show, and it's Frank Pepe's Pizza up there in New Haven, who is now selling, among other things, some genuine Italian canned tomatoes, which I had the opportunity to sample. So I just want to say, folks, I was impressed. I got to be honest with you. I feel like I know tomatoes and I love tomatoes, and there's a time that you want to use tomatoes. Generally, people have the belief that you want to get Italian plum tomatoes. Generally, they come from San Marzano in Italy. I can't even tell you, I don't recall what the source was, but I tried some of Frank Pepe's Italian canned tomatoes, and I was astounded at how high quality they were. So, folks, if you're interested, and by the way, that's I guess what got me there was, even though I am a born and bred New Yorker, and I might have a bias in terms of where some of the, where the epicenter of great pizza making is, other than Naples, I have to say, New Haven, Connecticut, man, you got 3 or 4 between Frank Pepe's and some of the other places. You have 3 or 4. Modern pizza is fantastic. What's the place I go? There's a place in West Haven with the clam pie. They are producing some of world-class pizza in New Haven, and if you're interested, anyone, genuine Italian canned tomatoes, it's pepespizzeria.com. Let's cut in the short remaining time that we have. I'm going to skip out on the whole notion of you guys did a beautiful story on what do you call this here? It's the top tech startups in 2018, but I'm going to skip that in the interest of time, because I also see a story on the Skiff Table about beyond custom cocktails, bars and restaurants turn to proprietary liquor. So let's close this thing out with proprietary liquor. What does that mean? What's going on? What should we know?
If I remember right from the editing of this, it is restaurants basically making their own, and so it is whether it's making their own gin by doing the right mix of their own mix of juniper berries and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of the next kind of thing where you have a bespoke product, and most of them that are doing it well are focusing on one thing. So it's not hey, we have whiskey, vodka, gin, vermouth. They pick something that they're strong with and go with that. And it's another way to really localize a restaurant and also an experience. One of the things that we've looked at with travel over the past 5 years is this shift to doing things that really can't be replicated elsewhere. In travel and in many things over the last 2 decades, it's been about every destination having the same thing that every other destination has. It's why Fifth Avenue is the same thing as the Champs-Élysées, or as you can find in Paris, or a high street in London, or someplace in Hong Kong. It's the same shops, it's the same whatever, and it's made everything rather boring and the same. Having a proprietary liquor at your restaurant is another way of just solidifying a thing that you can only get in one place and only experience there. It's also, in a way, a battle against delivery. And restaurants that are doing it really well these days are realizing that if they offer something that's unique to a place, and also is a unique experience when you go in, it's something that is a borg or a protection against kind of the sameness that permeates our lives in so many other ways.
On a slightly different subject, did you have a cocktail of choice yourself?
Oh, this time of year, it's a Negroni.
Yeah.
But your discussion of gin and tonics earlier, I 2 summers ago, my wife and daughter and I lived in Madrid for 5 weeks.
Nice.
And I probably consumed more gin and tonics than water, because I had to do as the locals do.
Yes, absolutely. It's an obligation, and also, by the way, a thirst quencher. I honestly, it's like the thing about gin. I talked about its potency before, and maybe I'm making that up, but it's always been my experience. No matter how much you can drink of anything else, a little bit too much gin and things get just a little crazy. But as a summer, beverage. With the good tonic and the lime, that's a happy maker. What about eating wise? Did you cook tonight or order in? What's going on in the household?
Tonight we ordered in. We I had this radio show I had to call into, so I had to make things easy. And we also ate down on the There's a patio in our apartment complex, so I wanted to sit outside. So we had a nice little salad and some shrimps. But we usually cook about 3 to 4 days a week at home, and so we'll do a mix of picking up stuff in our office near Koreatown. There's a good grocery in Koreatown that we go to, the H Mart.
Yep.
And there's a good butcher on 8th Avenue and a good fishmonger on 9th Avenue that I walk by when I get to the fair, on my way to the ferry. So I'll often stop there and pick some stuff up. But tonight it was being easy.
Just as an aside, we don't have the time to cover it off. I know that your office is near Koreatown, but there's an article, I think it's today, in Eder, New York, about how Koreatown basically isn't what it used to be. The mom and pops are gone. 32nd Street is dominated by chains, again due to high rent and policy, blah, blah, blah. Jason, I want to do two things. I want to, first of all, thank you for your time, for your insight, for your intellect, for your humor. Tell people where they can go to find Skift Table, and Jason Clampet.
Skift Table you can get to at table.skift.com.
Okay.
If you're in New York on September 24th, you can come to our first event. We'll have restaurateurs, chefs, investors, tech companies on stage. You can find out about that on our website as well. The best way to keep track of us is subscribe to our daily newsletter, which is a ton of fun. My colleague Erica, who I mentioned earlier, and then Kristen Howley, our senior editor, the brains behind that. And that's really the best thing. And those are all so much better than following me on Twitter.
Got the picture. Okay, everyone. There you have episode 22, All You Can Eat. Our guest, Jason Clampet. Thank you. I would suggest everybody grab a hold of the newsletter. I know I get mine every day. I'm fascinated by it, and it comes for nothing, which is beautiful. The Skift, what is that? What's the actual name of the restaurant forum on September the 24th?
It's the Skift Restaurants Forum.
Oh, there you go.
Very, very simple.
Skift Restaurants Forum on 24 September of this year. It's going to be a fantastic event. So, Jason, I thank you. And to everybody else, thank you for tuning in. I will be back with you next Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, for All You Can Eat. Until then, remember, life is short, so never waste a meal.
I'm the Teflon Pan Man. I'm the Teflon Pan Man. Ain't nothing gonna stick on me.